In this lab, we are going to create a website and then going to containerize that website. It's going to be an ASP.NET web application, but you don't need to be a developer or an expert on .NET development to execute this lab. All the source code is provided for you. You are only going to focus on creating the container out of that website. Your instructor has given you the location of the website in the lab document. So first create a folder called div, and by looking at your lab document, find where the location of the website is in your lab assets and copy that website into the development folder. So in this case, I'm going to paste it. The name of the website is called My Web App. And if you go inside that web app folder, you can find that there's a solution or Visual Studio solution called My Web App. Because the Visual Studio, when you run this solution, is going to start containers, you need to start Visual Studio as an administrator. So don't double click this solution file and open Visual Studio. Visual Studio Community Edition is already installed on your lab environment. This comes as part of the configuration the instructor has done in the image that is being shared with you. You can start Visual Studio from Start menu. Or you can start from the icon, but make sure when you start it as an administrator. So I start Visual Studio as an administrator. The next step is to browse to the folder where we copied our website and then open the solution. Click File, Open, Project or Solution. Click File, Open, Project or Solution. And then browse to the folder where you copied the website. So in this case, div My Web App. And this is the solution file that you need to open. So this is an ASP.NET full framework web application. It's an MVC application. And if you explore this solution, it's the default website that you get when you create an ASP.NET web application using Visual Studio, but I have done few modifications into that. If you explore the file system, you can find that there is a file called Docker file there. So we already know what this Docker file is going to do. It gives you the base image out of which we are going to create our image. So in this case, it's going to be based out of Microsoft ASP.NET 4.7.2, and it has already ASP.NET installed and IIS already in place. If you don't have this image on your local machine, never mind. During the build process, Visual Studio is going to get it. And also, if you go to the Docker Compose project, you can find that there's a Docker Compose file that tells how to build this web application. So in this case, it's going to use the Docker file in our solution and then going to create an image after building this solution. Let's open PowerShell as an administrator. Do a bit of cleanup so we'll have a nice screen. If you type Docker images in your lab environment, ideally you should have an image called Microsoft ASP.NET 4.7.2. If you don't have that image, you can easily pull that image by typing docker pull Microsoft ASP.NET 4.7.2. So that's the version you need to download. Because I already have this image, it just said you already have it, there's nothing to download. So I have this image now on my local machine. Let's first build the solution. So select My Web App. So to build the solution, if you are not a developer, the building is the process where it compiles all the source code into some binary executables. So I first select the debug build and then I select the solution. And I'm going to build this solution. So as part of the build process, what will happen is it's going to download all the NuGet packages. It's going to compile this solution. If you have any syntax mistakes or any program errors, if it can find it during the compile time, it's going to give it. Because we already created this solution prior to the lab, this solution should ideally build successfully. So in this case, the build is successful. What I'm going to do now is to select the debug, and I'm going to run this solution. So click Docker that play button when the selected solution is Docker Compose. So when you run it, it's going to compile this one, package the web application as an image. It's going to use this Microsoft ASP.NET base image, copy all the website artifacts into the container, and going to create a container. And then it's going to start a debugging environment where you will get the IIS website. So give it some moment. So now you have an ASP.NET web application running in the container. So it says Windows Container on AWS, and your host ID is the container ID. So it's a typical ASP.NET web application. If you want to get the time, it just showcases you the time. If you keep refreshing, it will give you the Docker container ID that is using. If you explore where this container ID is coming from, if you go to the controller, and there you can find I'm just returning the environment name, the host name of the machine, and it prints it out as a message on the front page. So this is actually the host name, but it's in the case of container, if the application is running in a container, it's going to type that container ID as the host name. If you type Docker images, you can find that the Visual Studio has now built an image called my web app, and the tag is due. The tag is due because the version I built is a debug build. If I type Docker PS, you can find that it has started a container with the ID 4A9B. And if you look at the website, your host ID is same as this container ID. So this container is started by Visual Studio as part of your running process. So remember, we click play button. So it's spin up a new container and is now running this website inside this container. Let's inspect what is happening inside this container. So to do that, let's say Docker inspect, give the container ID, and then you can explore how this container image is configured. If you go into a section where it defines the entry point, you can find that it's running the W3 SVC, the famous IIS process. Along with that, it's running the remote debugger so that Visual Studio can attach into this during debugging to get debug points hits to do live debugging, for example. It has done some volume mounting under volumes. You can find it. So this is how the Visual Studio create this container, so that when you make some modification, you can still go there and then look at the website and then observe them when you are debugging this application. This runs on a special NAT network. It's not running under localhost that usually you use when you are creating web application and debugging. So this is a special NAT network that is being created as part of spinning up this container. If you go to localhost, you cannot access that website through localhost. So you need to use this special NAT network IP address. So how do we know the IP address of this special NAT network? If you go to Docker inspect and then observe the container, you can find that the NAT network IP it got. So this is the container, the website that is running now, that is being started by Visual Studio, and it's running on this IP address. So let's type Docker images, and you can find that Visual Studio has already created an image called my web app with the tag due. It's the tag due because I created a debug version. Let me stop debugging this web application. To do that, close this the web application that started and click stop button to stop debugging. If you type Docker PS after stopping from Visual Studio, you can find that the container is still running. The reason being, what happens is when you are building this solution, the container is going to run behind the scene, and the Visual Studio is going to mount or copy the files that is being modified into this container, and then run IIS. So you're not going to start and stop the IIS every time when you start debugging. Let's now try to create a release build instead of a debug build so that I can release this software to production. So like before, select the release build and you can build it from here, where it's going to download all the NuGet packages if you need to, and it's going to compile the source code into an executable, and it's going to create a release version of that. So the difference here is the image will not have things like the remote debugger running behind the scene. If you type Docker images, you can find that it builds this image called my web app latest, and this my web app latest is the one that Visual Studio built as a release build. If you inspect that my web app latest version, which is the released version of that Visual Studio has created, you can find that the entry point doesn't have any remote debugger attached, unlike the debug build or the development build. And it has also exposed the port 80 in this container. So the IIS is running inside this container can communicate over port 80 to the outside world. Let's clear the screen up, and I'm going to type Docker images, and here you can find I have the latest version of the image, which is the release build. Let's type Docker run, because the entry point is given. I can start this web application. In this case, I'm going to run it detach mode, because it's a web service. I don't need to run it interactively. I'm going to run the release build, which is my web app latest tag. And I need to expose the port, so I type -p. So inside the container it's port 80, and I'm going to expose that as port 80 in this container host. So when you press enter, of course it returns immediately because you are not running it in interactive mode. And if you type docker ps, you can now find there's a container running the image my web app latest, and it's running the IIS as the entry point. We don't know which IP to connect into now to observe this website, so we inspect the container ID, and I'm going to pick the IP address from here, and then go to the browser and then type that IP address, because I cannot access this website through localhost. So I type that special NAT network IP address, and what will happen is that IIS of course going to start, and it's going to give you the release version of the website. Because we use the same code, it looks like the same version. You have Windows container on AWS, the ASP.NET web application. So what I'm going to do is get docker ps. So let's stop all these containers. We don't need them anymore because I already have the image that I wanted to have. So let's stop all these running containers and then explore the Docker images. So here I have my web app latest image. I'm going to publish this image into Amazon ECR or Elastic Container Registry so that I can run it on ECS. I am in my ECS console, and under repositories, I'm going to create a new repository. We already studied how to do that. Give it a name. In this case, you can say something like my web app, and then create the repository. So these steps we already studied before. What I'm going to do now is to log in into this repository from my lab machine. We already studied how to do that. Copy that command and then paste it here. Do a bit of cleanup. If you type Docker images, I have this my web app latest image. I'm going to publish it. Before that, I'm going to log in. So I'm executing this command that I copied from ECR repository commands. So login is successful. The next step is to tag this image with the full URL of the repository. So I execute docker tag, make sure that the image name I have on my local machine is correct. and then press enter. That will give you an alias to the image ID that you created as the release build. So the final step is to push this image. Copy that push command, go to your console and then press enter. So this will publish the website image that we created. We already learned how to publish an image into Amazon ECR. If you haven't, if you can't remember them, just revise the previous labs we did. So once this image is published, it will be available in Amazon Elastic Container Registry, and then we are going to use that image and then run it on Amazon ECS. So the publication is successful. If I go into my repository, you can find that the latest version is available. You can get the push commands from here also. So the latest version of my website is published. The next step is to, of course, run it. But how to run it by creating a task, we are going to study in another lab.